Should it be working? Oh, great. Okay, cool. As he just mentioned, my name is Matt. I run a site called Polygraph. First thing I want to ask people is, who here has heard of the Bechdel test? Okay, cool. Do we have someone with a mic that can go to one of the people? All right, great. So yeah, let's go with you. What is the Bechdel test?
So it's a test as to whether a movie has two female characters who talk to each other about something besides a man. And it's a really high percentage of movies that fail that really basic test.
Oh, gold stars. Awesome. So that's exactly right. This is a site called BechdelTest.com. And I'm not going to go through the backstory about the Bechdel test, but it started as a half joke in feminist literature and is actually, over the past few decades, or a couple decades, has become almost the default way to talk about gender diversity on screen. There's actually this page on BechdelTest.com where you can go and look at the percentage, and to this gentleman's point, 57% of films pass this test, and then the remaining ones don't pass. And again, it's a pretty low bar. All you need are two women who are named, so they're not minor characters, who talk to each other about something other than a man. So they're advancing the story around something other than just the male lead character. Cool. So I thought this was really interesting as a data source. I've been looking around on Reddit, trying to figure out what people thought about it. And a lot of the comments are along these lines. So this is a guy named Brian who's talking about the statistics page, actually. And he says, I get it. There's a lack of female perspective in movies, but the answer is get to more female involvement in screenwriting, not to criticize people. People being the directors who don't have enough women in their films. So I thought this was actually a really good premise. If you looked at the writing room, the people behind the scenes, and you looked at the directors and the writers and producers, if you had more women behind the scenes, would they produce a film that passed the Bechdel test, i.e. had more on-screen diversity, gender diversity? So this is one of the charts that I made for a project on the Bechdel test. I think the internet is being a little bit sad, right? Oh, there it goes. So for example, if you were to say, if we only looked at women directors, of all the films on BechdelTest.com, only 10% of them would fail versus the 45% if it was ignoring the gender of the director. And then so on and so forth if you just had women writers and producers. So I thought this was pretty neat, and then went to the internet to see what they thought. And most people were pretty underwhelmed by the results, which I was surprised by, in the sense that I thought, okay, the reason why we're having so many films fail the Bechdel test is because you have a bunch of men writing movies. So if you put me and a bunch of my male friends in a room, we wouldn't come up with Broad City. And the idea was that this was a way to advance past the notion that there's just flaws in the Bechdel test, such as these, that the test is really weak. So for example, if you have a 5-second scene in Gravity, that actually makes it past the test. So people were still underwhelmed because the test sucks in many ways. And they compared it to BMI. So for example, you can have someone who's really fit but has a low BMI, therefore that's a problem with the test itself. And then you have answers like these, that male movies are really good, Hollywood is a business, and if male movies make a lot of money, that's the economics of the film industry. And you can read the bottom comment, I'm not gonna read it. But yeah, you get a lot of this type of stuff. And then history. So, well, no shit, Saving Private Ryan, Gladiator, and Troy failed the Bechdel test. They're about war films. You couldn't have cast women as soldiers. So these are semi-valid arguments. And what I ended up having with the article I wrote about the Bechdel test was just the people that enjoyed it already agreed that there was low on-screen diversity. And the people who didn't agree just had the same divisive rhetoric that I was seeing before I wrote the article. So this is my favorite impetus for doing any project. And there were two things I wanted to do. One was fix the test, so try to address as many of the concerns as possible, like the test sucks. And two, address all the things that we just went through, and there's lots of them. So one of the ways to fix the test is just get a more accurate representation of gender on screen. And also, one of the things I was finding was many academics had written papers about this. There's endless PDFs you can find in journals that talk about on-screen diversity, and no one reads them because they don't share their data, and it kind of looks like bullshit. And there's even projects coming out from Google and the Gina Davis Institute now where they obscure their data for God knows why reason. So the idea was actually to allow for full exploration and not just write a story. To Nathaniel's point earlier, this was an exercise in collecting data and sharing it with the public. And the next question I had was, well, why didn't anyone do this? And the answer is it's a lot of annoying and manual work. And I go back to this anecdote from a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Does anyone know this book? Okay, highly recommend it if you're doing data work. There's this great anecdote about motorcycle maintenance. And the way that you have to repair a motorcycle, you have to take it apart completely, have all the parts on the ground very well organized, because when you try to put it back together again, if you're missing one of those parts, the motorcycle won't run. You'll have to take it back apart again and then do the same exact process. And this author, Robert Pirsig, uses this notion of gumption. Basically, you have to have the patience to take apart the motorcycle, and if you forget a bolt, not to lose your mind. And that is kind of the process that I'm about to walk you through, is like, you need a lot of patience to do this effort, which is my hypothesis why no one had done it. It's just a lot of manual work. It's a lot of disassembling the motorcycle. So this was one of our first efforts using a corpus from Cornell that had already been compiled and by gender. And just looking at the breakdown of the films, we're like, oh, this is like exactly what we thought it was. So we ended up, instead of using the Bechdel test, using film dialogue, which is, I would say, several steps better than the Bechdel test, which was never even meant to be a measure of gender diversity. There's arguably more accurate ways to measure gender diversity. We felt this was just an improvement over the terrible thing that we were working with. So the way that we got all these film scripts was basically scraping the entire internet. And we spent 2 weeks just finding scripts, if this loads. So these are the 30 some odd sources that we found, which are basically illegal sites where people can post film scripts. And we just scraped the whole thing because they're already illegal. It's not like they're going to send us a cease and desist. So there's that. And then we got all the scripts, and we needed to know what movies there were because they're just PDFs and text documents. So I spent another week just matching the scripts to IMDb. So we ended up with 3,000 scripts, which are all on the internet. They're totally open source. You can go and look at them if you want. So there's 3,000 scripts here. So for example, if you were to go to Hellboy, this is on dailyscript.com. The internet's a little bad, but it looks exactly as you'd imagine, just a big text document with a film script, kind of like this. So the next step was, all right, so how do we take this and turn it into a beautifully parsed CSV, essentially, of character, gender, and then the words that they hypothetically spoke in the movie, which sometimes differs from the script, as you'd expect. So the woman I was working with was a brilliant engineer. She wrote this parser that basically said, all right, you dump in this the script of young man, young woman, and then it then parses a number of words, and we just need to obviously figure out, well, is it a man or is it a woman? So the way to do that was, once we figured out how many words Jules had, for example, which is a top character in this film with 4,200 words, we then had to figure out, well, who is Jules in this film? So for example, if we were looking at the Matrix script, we have Trinity, who is played by Carrie Ann Moss, and this is Keanu Reeves, but Keanu Reeves is an actor, which is on his IMDb profile. So we basically were able to draw this thread from character to actor/actress to gender using the IMDb actor/actress designation, which is also self-editable, so you can identify as an actor or actress, and we just use this data. So if you wanted to say actor and you're a woman, that's awesome. We use that as our data point. So again, I want to go back to this anecdote of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, because this is easier said than done. A lot of the scripts look like this, which is RoboCop's script from 1986. Just to pull this up. Yeah, it's not even a PDF. It's like some intern probably ran this through a Xerox machine, and like we had to write this PDF parser that, like, this isn't selectable. This is literally a Xerox. So we had a lot of issues with just parsing this data. Again, lots of gumption required. And then a lot of weeks and nights just spent manually mapping script characters to IMDb characters. So for example, like we had someone in the script called W Guy, which I assume is white guy. And that's not in IMDb. So we had to figure out like who is white guy in IMDb and figure out what actor played white guy, so we can figure out if that's a man or a woman. And then with other problems like name changes, which is ridiculous. So in the script, we have this script, Dr. Monatoff is now Dr. Fisher on IMDb. And that was just inferring out of all the doctors on IMDb, there was only one doctor, and there was only one doctor in the script, so that just means the name changed, which means they're played by this actor or actress. This is Donnie Darko, it looks like. So finally, we got to 2,000 scripts, which shuts down any argument about sample size, which is the first thing you hear on Reddit, is that the sample size is too small. So we felt like 2,000 was good. We still had issues with sample selection, which I'll get to in a second. This is the site that we ended up making, which takes all the data. So while that loads, this is kind of the main chart, the main hook. Each dot represents a film, and the color simply and its position on this axis is its representation of male/female dialogue. So all of these films in our 2000s film sample are 100% spoken, or the script was 100% male in terms of its lines of dialogue. Let's see if this is loaded. It is. Nope, didn't load. But you can look at that on your own leisure. How much time do I have? 5, cool. So the great thing about this project is it actually ended up breaking through the echo chamber. We were fortunate enough to get on the front page of Reddit, which gets you about 150,000 views, give or take, which is a lot of eyeballs on your work. And we got about 4,000 comments, which is awesome. So the great thing about, before I get to the terrible things, the great thing about being on Reddit is you get crowdsourced data cleaning. So you have everyone looking at your data. This is like better than a peer review. Everyone's like, well, like you mischaracterized this character as a woman versus a man, or like our parser had accidentally made a character in Lord of the Rings the wrong character. It still ended up being male, but like that just undermines the integrity of the data. But we still had perfection issues. So a lot of the comments were along these lines. I'm actually pretty disturbed by the quality of this data set. Yes, like the conclusion of things skew pretty male is true, but the goal is to have objective evidence of bias that's hard to claim when every single spot check shows gross errors, which is partially true. There are a lot of errors. And with an undertaking like this, we knew we would never have perfection. That said, we were very confident at the overall thrust of the results that were like, all right, we can move these a few percentage points, but the graph basically stays the same and hopefully shuts down those arguments that we saw in the Bechdel test article. And then we have things like this, like whether we chose to label a character male or female, and here's a Pokemon fan writing 200 words about how Mewtwo is explicitly genderless. What an outrage. Literally writes, what an outrage. And then we have issues like agenda, and this is probably a little bit different from most journalistic entities. Ours is kind of like a weird thing on the internet that sits between journalism and just internet content. But It looks like you have an agenda here. Interesting how you didn't include Mad Max Fury Road, A League of Their Own, et cetera. So we got a lot of arguments about like, what is your agenda? Why are you doing this? And from my perspective, it's like no one had done it, so let's just do it. It's not to like prove anything, but like we're working with what is essentially the BMI of gender diversity measurements, which is underwhelming, as BMI is in many ways. And this kind of plays to an earlier point, is that academics are ruthless. Every project I've done on the internet, I've gotten long emails from academics. So this one says, this one made me cry a little. I'm going to use this analysis next week in my seminar class for first-year students. This is the class example of what we in the hard sciences call play science. And this is play science in its most glaring form. So this is a really, really fun comment. But the results were far better discourse than we had before. So this was like kind of tongue-in-cheek / serious. Murphy Kills says, all right, guys, let's brainstorm some excuses so we can ignore and dismiss the pattern. And this is a really fun thread. But it's like, it's really hard to write these comments when you have all the data at your hands, and you can't just dismiss it because they didn't consider X. Like, it is fully exploratory. So you could cut the data by genre, and I think this chart has it. Yeah, you can go by genre, and you can search for a film, and every film, you can look at the character breakdown. Let's see if this is loading now. No, it's not. Cool. So I don't have a ton of time. Maybe we can get these in the questions or even talk about it over lunch. Our like 2 thought experiments coming out of this project was like, this would never pass peer review. In fact, I had a lot of people email me and said you should submit this to academia. And I wasn't trying to prove anything. It was just an exercise in collecting data, kind of like the US Census isn't proving that the population is going up. It just needs to measure the number of people. So this was an interesting thought experiment that a lot of the projects that we do, we consider as like, is this going to pass the academic sniff test, which it probably wouldn't in many ways. And then 2, I alluded to this already, is like, we're not trying to prove anything. Like, I actually have a lot of beef with the data journalism industry trying to play the role of academics, trying to predict things. And unless you have the credentials and the peer review and you want to like say this is actually the case, I do think it needs to go through the peer review process, or at least some higher level of bar than your non-quantitative editor saying, yeah, this looks really cool, like our readers will like it. I want to leave proof to the academics, but I do want to do the data collection that the academics won't do. So I think that's it. Our next endeavor is on incarceration, and you can follow along on The Pudding, which is a new site that we're doing this year. And that's it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Matthew. So